Afternoon, everyone. Recording in progress. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sharon Tatom Garcia, APR, President of PRSA Detroit, and I'd like to welcome you to the program. Before we get started, I have to read our association's antitrust compliance statement. PRSA's policy is to comply with federal and state antitrust laws. Participants in PRSA meetings and programs are not to discuss industry-wide or individual company prices, current or projected, or matters relating to pricing such as costs, profits, wages, market allocation, or other competitively sensitive information. Compliance with the antitrust laws is a requirement for PRSA membership, and responsibility for compliance rests with each member. Participants have an obligation to terminate any discussion, seek legal counsel's advice, or if necessary, terminate any meeting if the discussion might be construed to raise antitrust risks. Okay, that aside, welcome again, and thank you for spending your lunch hour with us for an exciting PRSA Detroit program, Making an Impact with Metrics, featuring some of the area's top talent in digital marketing strategy and consumer engagement analytics. I'd also like to welcome and thank our valued sponsors. Today is our first day of showcasing our 21-22 sponsor roster, and we are thrilled to provide recognition and visibility to our sponsors. We cannot do what we do without our sponsors. Our sponsor drive for the 2021-2022 season just came to a close, but if you are interested in becoming or renewing your sponsorship, there is still time to get it in under the wire. Please shoot me a message and we will get back to you. We're tweeting live about this program now. Please join the conversation on Twitter. Find us at PRSA Detroit, and please be sure to use hashtag PRSA Detroit when you tweet about the program. And please connect on all of our social pages, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. There will be a moderated Q&A session beginning at 11:45, so please put in the chat and we will get to the program. Speaking of connecting, we know and we miss those best parts of the in-person programming. And it happened at the end, the mixing and the mingling, being able to connect with speakers in a smaller setting. Well, today our panelists and moderator have graciously offered to stay on after the program ends. So we will have 15 minutes of networking. If you're interested in networking, simply stay put when the program ends. This will be very informal, like a group networking session. Side note, we are ready to meet in person if you are. So we're discussing in-person opportunities for our summer and fall programs. Stay tuned and plan to attend. We cannot wait to see you in person soon. Very quick membership update about PRSA membership. Please check the membership page of our website because there is a summer renewal promo code. And if your renewal is up soon, you'll also receive a friendly reminder email from someone on our membership committee. So thank you so much for your membership. 2 upcoming programs to save the date on. Tuesday, June 29th from 8:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m., we will collaborate with IABC on the program Rebuilding Trust in Your Communications, the medium, the messages, and the messengers. MCCI's Rich Donnelly, APR, and Michelle Franzen Martin will show how to break down barriers and help rebuild trust in our communications by sharing with you their experience with Michigan Nonprofit Association's 2020 census campaign. And then join us on Tuesday, July 26th for a lunchtime program on self-care and the PR Pro. We have invited Susan Morgan Bailey, Senior Vice President of Culture and Wellbeing at Marsh McClellan Agency, to share her presentation titled Building Energy for Your Mission, Thrive Habits for Healthy Living. Both of those programs will be virtual. Online promotions begin early next week, so please stay tuned to prsadetroit.org and our social platforms. Now, without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our moderator, Chad Cyrowski. Chad is Chief Digital Officer at Truscott Rossman. As the firm's digital communications expert, Chad ensures Truscott Rossman clients are ahead of their competitors in using the latest tools and technologies to reach their target audiences. Building on his unique skill set and creativity, Chad successfully plans and implements digital strategies for clients across a wide range of industries. His expertise includes web design, development and implementation, social and digital strategy, and digital advertising strategy. And prior to joining the Truscott-Rossman team, Chad planned and implemented full-featured, hard-hitting digital media campaigns while serving as the Director of Digital Media for the Michigan AFL-CIO, Mark Schauer for Governor, and Progress Michigan. Chad is an MSU grad with a BA in political science, and he was born and raised in Michigan and has a lifelong interest in politics, business, and technology. Chad will introduce our esteemed panelists and begin the program. Welcome all, welcome Chad, and Chad, take it away.
Thanks, Sharon. As Sharon mentioned, my name is Chad Cyrowski. I really appreciate the introduction. A little bit more detail, I've been with Truscott-Rossman for over 6 years, and of course serve as the Chief Digital Officer in the Detroit office. We have 4 offices, one in Grand Rapids, one in Lansing, one in Detroit, and then another in Washington, DC. I'm very excited to moderate today's panel, and I really couldn't be more excited about today's panelists and what they can bring to the table. In fact, I'm honored to really help facilitate this discussion. We have a great panel focused on making an impact with metrics for you today, and I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce each of them. First up, we have Cyndi Greenglass. She's the Senior Vice President, Strategic Solutions, OSG Customer Engagement Services. With a strong track record in data-driven communications, strategic planning, and database development, Cyndi helps clients develop, execute, and measure their customer communications with a close focus on user acceptance strategies. Cyndi has the razor-sharp strategic skills matched by impeccable on-the-ground savvy and tactical abilities. These qualities have enabled her to build a successful company and reputation in performance-based marketing across a broad range of industries, including B2B and consumer-facing organizations, as well as in critical compliance and regulated communications. Cyndi is a member of the strategic leadership team at OSG Customer Engagement Services, where she is responsible for architecting and implementing multi-channel strategic solutions. She also oversees the company's strategic architects and the agency services division. Prior to becoming a quote-unquote direct marketer, Cyndi spent 10 years in the international business consulting arena with the US Embassy, the Canadian Consulate General, and the US Foreign Commercial Service. In 2016, Cyndi was named one of the 20 women to watch in sales lead management and one of the 10 most fascinating people in business-to-business marketing. Cyndi is passionate about educating future marketers on the importance of data analytics for strategic decision-making. She lectures on data and digital marketing nationally, is highly sought after to speak at major industry conferences. Over the past 10 years, Cyndi has taught, trained, and presented at over 50 conferences throughout the world. She has presented to every regional and national marketing group in the US, as well as running private label training for the MetLife, Stanford University, the European DMA, and China Post. She's a frequent lecturer at the university level and is an adjunct professor at WVU Master of Science program in Data-Driven Marketing Communications. Thanks for joining us today, Cyndi. Next up, we have Josh Wilson. He's VP of Marketing at Whitefish Credit Union. Josh is an award-winning marketing professional with more than a decade of experience in financial institutions and marketing. He currently serves as Vice President of Marketing for Whitefish Credit Union, the largest credit union in Montana, and he is an adjunct instructor with West Virginia University's Data Marketing Communications and Digital Marketing Communications graduate programs. His work in the financial services industry has concentrated on crafting integrated multi-channel marketing campaigns with a focus on marketing attribution. His campaigns have received multiple awards, including the highest honors from the Marketing Association of Credit Unions and the Credit Union National Association, and 2 Emmy nominations. Josh holds a master's degree in data marketing communications from West Virginia University and completed his undergraduate at Chapman University. He has served on various volunteer boards and has also been elected to public office. Thanks for joining us today, Josh. And finally, we have Diego Costa, Global Marketing Manager at ChemTrend. Diego is a strategic marketing executive well-versed in the development of comprehensive and in-depth go-to-market strategies. With over 16 years working with marketing communications, competitive intelligence, strategic planning and execution, business intelligence, and CRM, Diego helped B2B organizations to thrive in the Americas, Europe, and Asia. Diego speaks 3 languages, holds an MBA from University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, marketing specialization degree from Campinas University, Brazil, and information technology with a minor in business management bachelor's degree from Sao Paulo State University. Diego is a Brazilian living in Michigan, married to Fernanda, and father of Antonella. Welcome, Diego. And if I butchered any of those names, I sincerely apologize. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. First on our questions that we really want to walk through with the panel is going to be addressed to Cyndi. Cyndi, how are communications professionals leveraging data today to drive insights and evaluate the success of communication campaigns?
Thank you, Chad, and thank you to the whole PRSA Detroit audience. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We're seeing a great evolution in the importance of metrics because everything needs to be measurable today. We're being held more accountable than ever before. And what we're seeing is that in order to drive true relevance and personalization in our communications, we have to understand our audience's intent and where they are and what is important to them. So starting out by understanding whether they have an interest or intent in products and services, if they have a concern, if they're doing research and investigation, or they're looking to engage with you, allows you to then personalize the message and then look at what metrics will be most impactful to move them along in your conversation. So not all metrics are important at the same point in that conversation, right? If I have a general interest in a topic that I'm researching and I'm looking at general content, the metrics I would use there are very different than if I am trying to solve for a very specific problem or a very specific challenge. So you want to match the metric with where somebody is in the conversation and what their interest is. So I always say you want to start at the end and work your way up to the beginning. What does success look like in what you're trying to achieve in the campaign or the communication? Are you looking for engagement? Are you looking for action? Are you looking for awareness? And then from there, you can identify which specific metrics will help you to determine what success looks like.
I was going to say, I mean, Cyndi is absolutely correct for that too. It really comes down to defining that domain in terms of informing which metrics that you're going to have. And that, in fact, really could be different. I mean, at Cyndi's point, if you have, say, social media metrics that some may consider vanity metrics, if that is the objective of the organization, the brand, the campaign, the cause, is to measure that sentiment, then you want to make sure that's defined up front and everybody's on the same page prior to going forward and evaluating those campaigns. Part of what we fall into trap with is these are the key performance indicators or KPIs, and they're the universal across all the different campaigns or initiatives or brands, whatever that is, communications, marketing. But that's not the case. You really truly have to define what that is prior to engaging. And that way, you know, in terms of how to measure it during the actual initiative itself.
That's great. Thank you, Josh. I wanted to pick up on something that you said there. We're talking about through COVID, post a pandemic, we're in what we call the attention economy now. Our attention has been so diversified and is at such a premium. Some of the interesting metrics that we're looking at too is consumption patterns by media, by time of day of week. Like we all know we used to know that people had certain behaviors based on going to work and coming home, right? Patterns of professional and personal lives. With the blending of this coming together and with office and home blending together and kids being, homeschooled and everything's kind of become so much more blended, identifying and measuring intent and engagement and consumption by time and day is really important for us as communicators because we're not going to have the same attention span of our audiences as we used to have.
Cyndi and Josh, you both raised great points. I have a 2-part question, the first for Cyndi and then the second for Josh. Cyndi, could you go a little bit more in depth on what intent means and how you measure it and how you determine it? You know, in the marketing world, it's something that we use pretty consistently, but for folks that are new to it or just beginning, I wonder if we can help explain it and bring it to life for them.
Sure. So I think about intent data as being a little bit like being on a dating app. Think about, you're not getting married. You might be interested in meeting people. You might be looking at joining a community. You want to learn more about who's in that community. And you might be researching and finding out more information about the people that might interest you, getting to know them. That would be the same thing that we look at social and digital footprints of people showing intent and interest by where they go, what type of information that they are searching on. This can be keyword, this can be keyword searching, this can be communities that they are spending time on. If they are on your specific website as the end user, or if you're a PR professional on behalf of a client, where are people spending time on your site, on your page? What are the areas that they seem to be most interested in that can show intent? The next level of intent, that's at an awareness level. The next level of intent is what type of data are they downloading or engaging with? We know that podcasts and video are extremely consumable. Some of them are more specific to further down in the intent, like I'm very interested in a how to do something, versus I'm getting a general understanding, like this could be a general understanding download. I want to learn more. If I had a webinar that was focused on 5 specific tips to marketing automation and implementing metrics, that would show less intent about learning a subject matter and much more granular intent around I may be interested in actually buying a software package or in a marketing automation system to implement it. So does that help to show the difference in intent?
I definitely think so. Not to jump in, but occasionally the way I think about it is, if anyone has ever watched Glengarry Glen Ross, there's a component in there where the best salespeople are given the gold leads. When I think about intent, I think of them as the gold leads. It's the target audience, which you mentioned, Cyndi, really demonstrating what they are actively looking for. It's one thing to target people based on interest, but if they are actively looking for what you're offering or what your client is offering, those are the people that you can really, they're your low-hanging fruit, and you can help move them through the funnel because they've already demonstrated an intent. They've already basically moved a little bit through the funnel at the outset of it. And that's hugely helpful for people to focus on.
Completely agree, Chad. Great.
Josh, you had mentioned something about vanity metrics. And I know that you and I had discussed these a little bit. Do you want to talk about, what qualifies as a vanity metric, and just go a little bit more depth on that? Because we use that term, but I'm hoping we can help define it for our audience.
Right. So I think the broadest point about, say, the use of vanity metrics is that's in the eye of the beholder, right? It's a subjective term, but it's not some kind of pejorative in that sense that you have to look at it based on those objectives. So if you consider a vanity metric, some might say those are impressions. Those could be views, those could be likes, retweets, whatever kind of social media metric that would show some even level of engagement with that, but also views, and say, what is that really doing for me? In an executive structure, say a senior executive structure that's maybe outside of the communication realms, but has that level of oversight, or even at the board level, there's an element of, I'm going to call it attribution, but really knowing what are those metrics doing for the brand? What are they doing for the organization? How is it actually getting me results? Yes, we've had 5 million YouTube views. What does that actually mean? If you can define that as part of your broader strategy on a communication side, we are looking to get our message out and to drive a potential narrative or some kind of other image of this brand. And the more people that view this and that we can show a level of engagement, maybe that's the time they watch the video, maybe that's a completion rate on there. You're starting to move beyond some of those vanity metrics, but still they're around a level of engagement interaction that doesn't necessarily lead to sales, but it does show that there are people actively viewing it. That in itself can be a KPI or key performance indicator that you want to go from. But the goal is to establish that up front so that everybody who knows part of the campaign say, we're going to track impressions or we're going to track views. This is how we're going to gauge success. And that's also how it can inform how we're going to say, maybe go from paid promotions. If it's going to be purely earned media, is one that is socially, organically spread, then you want to define that as well. Our goal is to have an earned media. We're not paying for this. We want it to go viral in a basic sense. But we need to have that as a defined pattern. And then it becomes not a vanity metric, not some kind of item that we're tracking just for the sake of tracking to make ourselves feel good, but it's truly a tactical component of this campaign. And we're equating that with success of that campaign.
Excellent. And one thing I think is critical for the audience to understand, which you mentioned, Josh, is the necessity of everyone agreeing on those metrics at the outset. You know, you had mentioned that sometimes vanity metrics have a bad rap, so to speak. But if everyone is in agreement that these KPIs and these metrics actually ladder up or are what you want to achieve, then everyone's on the same page and you don't get that most feared question at the end of any report, which is, well, that's great, but what did it do for us? Before I move on, Diego, I wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in on this first question to see if you had any insights or thoughts that you're willing to offer.
Thank you so much, Chad. I think expanding a little bit on what Josh just mentioned, it's really important when we are defining the KPIs. Even before that, why are we doing the campaign in the first place? What do we really want to achieve with that? Once we have that goal clear in the minds of the team and everyone that is joining, then it's easier for you to try to nominate specific KPIs for you to measure success. Then you know what success will look like, right? I think, and then all this debate about vanity metrics and the real impact in my business, it's off the table because you know from the start, from the get-go, what you want to achieve and how you're measuring that. I think you're.
I am officially unmuted. You would think that after a year of Zoom calls, I'd have figured it out, but apparently not quite yet. I really appreciate the insights, Diego. And that tees in well to our second question, which I'll first address to you. You know, we've gone through this process of putting together a campaign, most likely across different channels and platforms. We've decided on some KPIs and metrics that we're going to track for our client or for our own company. You know, but what do we do with that? So Diego, when reporting up to leadership, what's the best way you've found to share campaign results with internal stakeholders?
That's a great question, Chad. Yeah. So as in any type of communication, what we try to do is to adapt the message to that particular audience, right? And talking with C-suite board or whatever, that level of leadership, what we always try to do is to put together a business case. We want to try to, from the get-go, try to show them the real impact in the business of a given campaign or a set of campaigns. I think by starting with that, you're talking with their language already. You don't have to go through the entire, how can I say this, convincing steps along the way to try to sell success of the particular campaign. I think another thing that is very important for them, I mean, they're occupied with several other things, right? They're not specialized in particular communications of marketing. So having some type of frame of reference on what success looks like, it's also very important, right? So starting with this business case type of approach, trying to understand, okay, this is what we want to achieve. This is what we actually achieved. And then provide some type of frame of reference is really important. 20% open rate of a campaign, for example, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? If you don't have the reference, you really don't know. So the discussion, you're going to lose the opportunity to really talk about how successful or unsuccessful a given campaign was. I think another thing that we always try to do when talking with a particular level is to not go into, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but I think it's important to highlight because we saw people struggling sometimes providing too many details about what was done or how it was done. I mean, it really doesn't matter, right? The point is, of course, be prepared for that in case someone asks, but in the end of the day, what I want to do is to stick with the first three things that I mentioned. I mean, that proved to be successful from us. I think that would be my take on it.
Excellent take, Diego. And Josh, just to build a little off what Diego had mentioned, you know, we're taking metrics and we're producing them and putting them in a format for a very specific audience. You know, when we work with your own company or another client, if you're in an agency, you know, you're having them focus on their target audience because their target audience is what's going to help them achieve their corporate objectives. And then you have to take that and bring it back to the leadership in ways that they understand. Could you talk a little bit about how you communicate to, you know, the target audience that is going to help you achieve those objectives, and then the results that you package in a way, in a format that is understandable to a corporate executive? I've been in many a meeting where someone flashes an Excel spreadsheet on the screen and no one understands what it means.
Yeah, so there's a couple of great takeaways. Diego made an excellent point that I love to hit on again, and that is in that business case, you're establishing a baseline. And that could be from a communication standpoint, you know, maybe it's a focus group. It's some kind of quantifiable data that you can measure against in order to expand whether the campaign, the communication strategy, marketing, whatever it is. The baseline is there. Once you have that framework in place, what you're measuring is that lift, that delta between there. Because when looking at C-suite, in my experience, that it's naturally skeptical. Okay, everybody, you know, has marketing. How do we know it actually works? And you want to show that there is a measurable way that you've actually produced that lift beyond. The question is, well, how do you know it's really working if we didn't do anything, you know, we still gotten those same results? So measuring that difference between here's the actual lift of what we did it, and then finding a way to test that if you can. But you have to know the audience to say, we're informing people who are financially minded, you know, your CFO, your other data-driven individuals on there, and your chief executive officer. And the part that I think what Diego says about being concise and short and to the point is that we're also looking at inferential data or inferential components. You want to be able to make a data set or a metric or a KPI that makes an inference based on this. Hey, we are seeing that we have had 5 million, you know, views across this, or we have a share of voice, which is we have 20% of every news article clicked right now within this scope, the automotive industry, pick one, is talking about this new automotive launch. Because of this, we are seeing a traction of, you know, pre-orders going through the website. We can make an inference based on the number of share of voice, that percentage, or the number of views that we have in a video, or number of article clicks, or the media exposure that we have, and we're inferring those results towards the actual solutions of the brand. That is what a senior executive wants to see. They want to see, are my dollars going to work, and is it actually affecting positive change towards their ultimate goal? Very seldomly are going to get dispositive data that really shows this is exactly the metric that led to this exact result. That's the ultimate goal, right? But the word to that is attribution. And I know we talked about this a little bit on, but that's kind of where I love, is showing that in marketing, and especially with digital metrics, we want to be able to show the cycle of this. As Cyndi kind of hit in the beginning with, we're showing like the intention and the sales funnel, and she's kind of basically talking about it. We want to show that one step logically leads to the other. Now, there's privacy concerns, there's other ways to show this, but dispositive data, or the ability to definitively prove that this action led to this result, is the ultimate goal of data marketing metrics, and is something that's advancing a lot within our technology.
That's a great point, Josh, and it's very hard to get to, and I'm glad we're going to spend some time talking about attribution and how to muddle through it. I think both Diego and Josh touched on something important for us to consider. There's a really big difference between reporting and analytics. And sometimes those of us, when we're in the weeds of a campaign, when you mentioned the spreadsheets, like throwing up the spreadsheet on the screen to your C-suite, we're living and breathing the campaign every day, and we forget that we can't sometimes see the forest for the trees. The reporting aspect of it is really heavy lifting, right? You got to go through that in order to get to the most important part, which is the why and what does it mean. And so often before you go into that meeting, you come in with all that data and detail, but you don't get a chance to step back and say, have I answered for the audience what this means? And so what? Like, what do we want the C person, whatever CXO, or not even C, whoever the audience member is, what do you want them to take away from what you did and what you learned, and put it in parlance and language that matters to them? And, there's two pitfalls I often see people fall into. If finance, I know Josh is in a financial industry. If finance is part of this in any way, either the meeting or your audience, go test it out with somebody in finance before you present it. Because the hardest and worst thing that can happen is you sit there and say, we got a return on investment of, I got a KPI with this big revenue. You do an attribution to something financial and you can't prove it out. Or if somebody in accounting doesn't believe it, because accounting people think lots of us in the communications field, aren't as rigorous in our numbers. So go make friends with somebody in finance, run the numbers that you want to present by somebody and let them poke holes in it and say, no, you know what? I'll buy that. I'll buy that. I follow you. It's good. It's safe. And the other thing that I sometimes see is we ask for, we get that confirmation bias. We go to the people like ourselves, the communication specialists, who speak our language, who understand what we're doing, and ask them to look at it and say, what do you think? Well, they think the way we think. So find somebody who doesn't speak our language and see if what we are presenting makes sense to somebody who is coming at this and looking at it for the first time. It'll help make that presentation go much smoother.
That's a great point, Cyndi. And you talked a little bit about attribution, and I'm wondering, and I would address this to both Josh or Diego, whoever feels most comfortable, to go a little bit more in depth on what attribution is, and how you incorporate it into your overall reporting of metrics, not only to C-suite, but to your clients or to your bosses.
Diego, you want to take that first?
Sure, yeah. So attribution depends on how you're looking at that, but basically will be the impact of a given campaign or activation with the entire customer journey, right? It will be the impact of a given activity that you performed out there to the result. For example, you are performing a webinar and trying to generate more leads, for example. So and then out of that webinar, you get 100 new leads for your business, that then your sales team will take them over, qualify, and eventually you have business from there, right? Depending on how you're looking at attribution, you might say that a marketing or the communication area or other organization structure helped in generate those initial leads. So the attribution will go through them. So maybe we can put more money for that particular type of activity because you understand that that's the best way to do it. However, this is one way to look at it. You have several other touch points along the customer journey that will actually help you to convert a particular lead into an actual piece of business. You might have the sales rep get in touch with them, if that's your structure, of course. Get in touch with them and trying to develop a partnership there or get a trial on your business. So there's a component there as well. So that's why it's really important when you are trying to craft or understand your attribution model, what are the key points that you actually think that will shift the needle or help in move a lead to a customer in this customer journey.
Diego, you touched on a really important point. When you're attributing metrics, you're not just attributing them to a specific target audience, but you're also in a way attributing it to a channel. As marketers, we exist in multiple different channels. And part of our responsibility, and Josh, I'm hoping you can touch on this, as a marketer or as a PR professional, what's our responsibility to the client when reporting those metrics up and attribute it not to just specific messaging or tactics, but to different channels and how we communicate that to our target audiences?
Right, and that definitely goes in lines of, you have, say, analog or out of home or some kind of other mass media marketing channel, and truly getting data from that. You know, those are difficult numbers. If you talk to any of the advertising representatives on those, say, when you're buying it, they're always going to have data quote, and it's always fantastic. But in the lines, you got to see where that inference is made, those inferential data points, and saying, okay, if we're going to be investing in this channel, are we going to get more lift from this area? And the better ways to do this is to test it, right? So if you're going to have an out-of-home type of campaign where it's truly, you know, billboards out there, bus wraps, or whatever little innovation that you want to go out with in terms of communications marketing campaign, test it for certain geographic areas, certain DMAs, and see what results that you get against a baseline of maybe other areas with similar results. You have to kind of make those level of inferences based on that to get some level of attribution on a non-digital channel to it. I'll give you an example, but to say that it's a lot easier to do it when everything's kind of linear with that same channel for digital. But we have an interesting crossover that we're doing now in one of our DMAs, where we're working our local CBS affiliate on an evening news channel where we're highlighting unsung heroes, you know, people who've worked in the pandemic in grocery stores and those kind of items. And we're giving them concert tickets to our first big festival that we're having out here that's already sold out. We bought a VIP suite, and we're going to bring them on stage with it and some big headliners. Everybody's fantastic, but they're doing this primarily through our TV channel, and there's a digital component through their website through CBS affiliate. Through that and through our attribution software, specifically Google Analytics, we're able to see the individuals that are coming there, nominating people from the forum, looking at the stories, watching those videos across multiple channels, including social, and actually going through the process of getting to our brand and applying for a home loan, a mortgage, and we can tie that back to some revenue. That's not the end goal of what we're doing for that level of campaign. We're trying to get out into a community, and we're trying to find a positive way to highlight some of those essential workers that have gone through the past year and a half. But in that time, we're able to show some certain results. For a C-suite level executive, you know, that's fantastic. I can say this level of engagement, even though it's purely altruistic on our part, you know, is leading to some actual results on here. In addition, we're seeing higher website traffic, those kind of things, where the attribution is may not directly tied, but we can see that we're seeing a certain lift within that DMA because we can look at the website specific and we're segmenting it out to a certain area.
You know, expanding what George is saying, so the underlying topic here is also the connection between all the systems and the process that you have behind, in order to be able to measure all of that, measure attribution. So you mentioned your website, you mentioned Google Analytics. So whatever tool is available for you, you'll only be able to really understand attribution if you have all of that connected. If you have a gap in the middle of the process, you might not be able to really truly understand attribution for your business model.
Diego, you touched on a great point, and just to kind of put a little bit of a bow on it, it's always something that I've run into, quote unquote, traditional advertising. You know, you put up a billboard and you have a phone number on it. The only way to actually track that is if that billboard has a specific phone number or URL associated with it, or if you have some type of intake form that actually asks people, well, how did you find out about us? So while, you know, the very ideal situation is that you have more or less a succinct and linear system that can trace it from point A to point B, sometimes you have to come up with solutions for clients that aren't the best, but are really the only way you can start to get down that attribution path.
Yeah, and Chad, playing a little bit of devil's advocate, you know, humans aren't very linear in the way we behave. So what often happens is we create this great campaign saying we're going, like, Josh's example, we're going to do this TV campaign, we're going to send them to a website, we expect them to do this in a linear fashion, and we will measure it that way for attribution. What happens is, we don't live in a single channel world, right? So they could be exposed to this message unless Josh is only doing it on the CBS affiliate during 1 hour during the day, and he's got a blackout of every other media. We tend to have multiple communications going on at the same time. So if you had that billboard, somebody drives by it, it sits in the back of your mind, but then you go and you see it on TV. And then what you actually respond to is a third impetus or somewhere else in a different channel. And then where do you attribute it to? Well, we know that you can't just do single channel attribution, and you can't do any more first touch or last touch attribution, because then you're not taking into account the fact that all of this other activity was done in between. And so to kind of put Josh and Diego on the spot a little bit, like, do you fight with that? Like, what do you do about all of the halo attribution in the middle when there's such a desire to focus on give me the one thing that worked?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say too, and Diego, I'll let you jump in as well. 100% a challenge, and I think there's technology to solve it. Starbucks is a really interesting one there too, where you get pinged on your phone when the app comes up because they have beacon technology, so they can tie in that digital experience in your app, and then you can go realize it with an in-store. We have in-store retail locations, and it kind of brings that experience together. But that's really expensive, right? And the part that I always try to advocate for with whoever I speak with and our students in our own industry is they start somewhere and get to some point. And as long as you have that data, it will breed more investment into those channels, but you can't go 100% into this. You have to start somewhere at some point to get this level of data.
Exactly. I will add, it's about compromise. We don't have enough technology today to try to understand, like the example that you just brought, Cyndi, of every touch point and the impact. And I'm waiting that in the back of the mind of, but the particular audience, definitely not, right? So it depends on, and then of course you have Starbucks, this Josh example, that is very sophisticated and pretty expensive. So I think the answer goes to what's the amount of resources that you have available, to you, the toolbox that you have available, what can you measure with that? For instance, in our case, Kent Trend specifically, what we try to do, we try to look at the business process, try to look at the execution of the business model, and try to really understand, okay, yeah, the consumer is non-linear, the customer journey is non-linear, but what are the touch points that might help me understand, or that I can actually measure the impact of my actions? And then we try to build on top of that, right? And then what we try to do is build a structure that will help us. It's a compromise. We have to focus on something, start on something Josh just mentioned. So we start with that structure and learn from that point.
And it also becomes sometimes a little bit of a turf battle. Attribution, we may not want it to be this way, but who owns the budget dollars, right? Who's got that money? And so those of us who are we're fighting for our piece of the budget. So we want to be able to prove that we have quantifiably moved the needle so that we keep our budget and our dollars. So sometimes that doesn't necessarily encourage us to work well with others on the team, right? And those that are in the more quant business, the sales folks know how to sell themselves as having, been the ones responsible for everything, right? They always say it's all me. It's because of my great sales efforts that I made this happen. But, those of us you can say in the communications and PR, for example, where that you had an impact, but you're not quite sure how to grab that metric to prove it out. And then you're going to lose that budget to somebody who just has a stronger message and can sell it better, right? So we got to do our job. I guess the bottom line is, I always say, we have to do our job and understand that we have to be able to prove it out and not let people who are more comfortable selling the cell, take some of that budget dollar away from us too.
That's an excellent point. And I know we have about 1 minute before we get into the Q&A, but there's one last question I want to ask because I think it's really critical. And I think all of us agree on here on how to communicate it to, none of us are perfect beings. We can put together a fantastic plan, and at the end of that, it may not work out. So Cyndi, I'll address it to you first. How do you handle a situation when you don't meet the goals or objectives that you started out with your client or company?
Well, I actually think that happens all the time to us, doesn't it? And I think that's transparency and humility, and tackle it head on. The goal of metrics is not to prove out what we want to know and what we already know. It's to tell us and learn from it. So the best thing we can do is own it. To say, this is what we said in the beginning. These were the assumptions we made. This is what happened. And this is what we learned from it. Because, you can fail into success much more easily than you can just learn from previous successes. So take it on and face it right on.
I love that. Josh, do you want to expand on that? And I'll kick it to you, Diego, right after.
Right. I say kind of just kind of quickly, I think you build more respect and more trust when you highlight some of the areas where you could have improved and could have done better. And to kind of give an example, that I also think you need to offer a solution or some kind of way that we are learning from this along with that. In our personal lives, when you have your partner that kind of talks to you about the rough day they had or a problem they're having, you kind of make that mental judge of, do I want to offer a solution or do I want to offer sympathy? Well, in the business ending, you're always going to get somebody offering you a solution to your problem. So you got to get ahead of that when you're reporting some of those negatives or some of those areas of opportunity and saying, yes, we haven't had this intended consequence. However, this is what we're doing to address it. This is how we're learning it, short and sweet and to the point. That has, I think, in my experience, kind of headed off a lot of those people that are wanting to be marketers or communicators and offering their own take, which you may have already ruled out or may not have been appropriate for that measure.
I think Josh and Cyndi already touched on the key word for me, which is the learning mentality. At the end of the day, right? Even when you're successful or unsuccessful, it's all about the learning process, because we're learning on this together, right? Rather from within the organization or with our customers, with our clients out there. It's all about the learning process. So at least if we're not successful, we learned another way on not to do it, right? Or we learn ways to not execute the process.
Definitely. I once had a client tell me, I can get anyone to tell me I'm smart for free. I'm not paying you for that. And I really reflect on that frequently. Part of our jobs as professionals isn't to give people, not to tell the story they want to hear, tell them the story they need to hear. And I think that honesty really goes a long way in establishing your credibility and ensuring that, Cyndi, to your point, you can kind of hold on to that piece of budget and demonstrate that you do bring value.
When I know it didn't work and I know I have to deliver news that might surprise, I put it at the very beginning of the presentation. I start with it because now you got their attention. It's just kind of like the proposal, right? When everybody goes to the last page to look at the pricing, it's like, don't do the build up to bad news. Deliver the news, what it is, and then say, and I'm going to tell you how I got to this conclusion. And like Josh said, and here's the solution to what we're going to do next. Because the longer you take, it's like your kids, the longer it takes to get out with the bad news that, they got the D on the report card, the more painful it is.
Sharon, I see that you've joined. I'll kick it over to you very quickly.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start with a Q&A from the attendees. And our first question is, do you find that educating clients and or leadership on the metrics that matter is a learning curve as our industry evolves?
I'll jump in on that too. Yes, it is. And I would say there's a cautious approach that needs to be had when educating senior executives, because that's part of it too. And especially in legacy industries, board executives, C-suite executives who are coming from a diverse background, but they may not be well versed in some of those metrics. There's an education component that comes into it, but you also need to distill it down to really truly what is actionable on there. To give kind of an example of this, as a digital marketer would probably know, Google, for example, really gets a localized setting with the results. You have to have a physical address somewhere. Your results are more likely to show up somewhere in those communications because they regionalize that. To try to get into the nuances of how Google algorithms works, it's a lot for C-suite executives, and they're going to kind of glaze over it, or leadership, or a client. So you want to distill it down and say, this is what it is. We need a physical address if you want to rank higher in these results. Ranking higher leads to this result. Okay, great, that makes sense. And then you are armed with those details in the behind. But I think it's always best to kind of just be abbreviated and get to the point, rather than trying to make it truly an education, because that's not where their focus wants to be.
Thank you. Cyndi or Diego, do you have anything to add about educating clients or leadership on the evolving nature of metrics that matter?
Definitely, especially when you start to engage more and more with leadership, for example, or with your customers, and they start to really understand why are we talking about this, really understand metrics. It's an ever-evolving process. It will never be the same, right? Because in the minute that we start to really engage, understand why we're talking about this, they're probably gonna want to learn more about that as well. So we have to be always evolving. And also we have the topic about buzzwords, right? Or the new trend that's coming. And then we're gonna have to be prepared for that too, depending on the tool that's happening, depending on the topic, the method, depending on what's going on in the industry, for sure.
That's a great point, Diego. The buzzwords, we use a lot of acronyms and terms in our vocabulary that may not be the leadership and your peers may not be familiar with. Even just the term attribution may not be something that they're familiar with. And even Chad, when he said, define intent to me, it's like, you take for granted that's something that everybody knows. So education is, as Josh said, little by little steps. And that what you want to be careful of is that you speak the language of the common man or woman, that what we're doing is speaking at their level of what they can interpret it as opposed to trying to say, let me explain the term to you. So I learned today, I used a term that may not be broadly understood by my audience. Next time, I'll be sure to use it in a different context. They've learned something, but they've also learned a new word.
Nice, thank you. And what's been one of your most successful data-driven campaigns? If anyone would like to share something specific.
I will say that it's not an actual campaign. I'll be very specific. It's not an actual campaign, but or like a one-time campaign, but an ongoing campaign, which is, okay, the website for the business that I'm working on right now, it's like the most important digital asset that I have out there, right? So what I try to do as much as we can is to drive visitors to that particular place, and from there get them to get in contact with me so we can get along with them on the customer journey. So I would think that in the way that we created this structure or this process, we've been quite successful. So much so that we are putting more and more, I would say, money behind it, so we can have more of that. So I don't know if that's too broad, but I think it also helps in our case because we're able to measure very specifically the steps when the visitor is consuming content or have the experience in my website. And then in the second that I receive that contact form, for example, from the site, my CRM is powerful enough to help me in all the stakeholders actually to understand, okay, what's going on right now, from the lead qualification to becoming an opportunity to then become actually a piece of business. So because we're able to really measure what's going on, we tend to invest more on that.
Thank you. Cyndi, you muted yourself.
Sorry, I want to yield my time to Josh because I've heard some of the amazing things that he's done in previous presentations he's given, and he's got some fantastic stories to tell.
Yeah, so no pressure, right? So I'll put it on the marketing side, and kind of hits on a little bit of kind of whatever we talked about. And I know with a lot of communications folks to say, hey, how's this applicable to me? We're talking about, financial banking products, right? But a lot of heavy work was done up front, and that's what I always advocate with. So starting with the organization, they said we're launching a brand new credit card product. And then you kind of go those natural things, like as a communicator, as a marketer would, what are some of the great features? Does it have rewards? No. Does it have a balance transfer fee? No. Does it have cash back? It's got nothing. Okay, so what's the selling feature of it? Well, it's got a really good low rate and there's no fees. Okay, let's fine. It sounds like every other banking product out there. So we've got a creative campaign. I'll kind of share a little briefly about it. But the bottom line is, I said, okay, we have this niche product, and it is truly a niche product. We need to find a very data-driven solution to say, who are the right people of this? Do we build marketing personas? What does a person look like? What's their interest? How are we going to get their attention? How are we going to cut through all the noise that, Samuel Jackson and Jennifer Gardner are cutting through Capital One for credit cards? And how do I going to sell, this product when there's so much competition in there? We need to really distill down in data. So we used, work with bureaus, we work with third-party data sources to append the data, and we got a really healthy dose of this. And we said, what is our domain? How are we going to define success? And that's going to be response rate. The standard direct mail response rate was like 2%. So we knew that was our baseline to beat. So we ended up doing a creative campaign, and usually I'm prepared with an example, but this direct mail actually had a video inside of it. So if you opened it up, a video played with it, and we had a customized offer of how much money this person was pre-approved for. But it was a very kind of cheeky, funny video that basically said this: hey, do you want a credit card that has great points and rewards? Well, this card is not for you. This card has nothing, and that's why it's awesome. We leaned into the whole thing. We just said this card was terrible unless you want to save money, because that's who the people were. They carried high balances. They paid 25, 30% interest rate, and we were going to cut that down and save them money. So we've distilled the message down. We put a fun creative on there, but it's all very data-driven into how we did this. And then we measure the results. What do we get? About an 8 to 10% response rate within the first 30 days. And we saw a tremendous lead up to credit card results, that we never would have thought that we would have. But the data led the way. Was it expensive to put in there? Absolutely. But I would much rather do that level of a project than say, we're going to blast out to 30,000, 50,000, 100,000 households and, cross our fingers of spray and pray for hopefully 2%. The broader goal that I try to have my students, or even our own organization, is every single time you touch somebody, you have to create value. You have to show that you know them. And if you don't, they're just going to ignore you. And the next time they actually do something that might be interested, like, oh yeah, that's my bank, or that's this brand, they're advertising, pitching something, I don't want to do it. If you only focus on times when you can create value within those communications, then you're going to be more likely to open it, more likely to have intention, more likely to have engagement, and truly, I think, get to somebody and get results and tie that back into the brand. And how you do that with fun creatives, that's the part I love, but you have to let data drive the way with it.
Thank you. Well, we are getting close to time. I think I can do one more question, but I just wanted to remind everyone, if you do have to jump off for a 1:00 meeting, we will be continuing the conversation with, again, the informal networking. Stay on and we will continue. And if you can't stay on, we want to thank you for joining us. And the last question is, at what point do you deem a new platform effective enough to start running client campaigns on? For example, on TikTok, would you run a client campaign as an initial test to see results firsthand, or would you wait until you see third-party reports about proven results? Any thoughts on that one?
Go ahead, Cyndi.
Oh, Chad, go ahead.
So I've actually come across this very exact situation. And to Cindy's point, it's all about transparency. A client comes to you, have you run any ads on TikTok? No, you would be my first one. And then they ask, well, do you think it's effective? And the answer is, I don't know. We can find out, though, if you're willing to take that risk. And you just need to enter into it with that understanding that you have to be honest about your own experience, whether or not you've done any before, and so that they totally understand that this is a test. Now, in the specific example I'm citing, it actually worked out really well, much better than I ever anticipated. So at the end of that, we had a very good result to share with the client. You know, we went through the standard things. Well, what are you hoping to achieve? How are we going to measure it? And key in there is, let's make sure your actual target audience is on here. You know, it's TikTok, so as a very special, specific audience. Are these the people you actually want to reach? Once we defined that and determined that it was, we were able to put together a pretty, you know, it wasn't a huge campaign, but given the expectations that we set at the front end, we were able to report very favorable results. And now they have the option of win right, spinning it up later. And that's critical. Not every campaign is going to be on TikTok or Snapchat or Facebook or even an earned media. You really need to pick the channel and the platform based on if your target audience is actually on there.
Thank you.
Couldn't agree with you more there, Chad. Also, I would ask, is it right for your brand? So sometimes a client will say, gee, I'm really interested because this is the new shiny object everybody's talking about as a media or a platform. But is your audience there for sure? And does that resonate with your brand and your positioning? Because it just may not be right for you.
Thank you. We're going to officially end the program now. I want to thank our attendees again so much for joining us on this really interesting topic. And thank you, Chad, Diego, Cyndi, and Josh for your insights. And if you would like to stay on, hang out. If you can't, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next program. Take care. Bye-bye.